Some stories are not just stories. They reveal the darker patterns of how people think, where decisions are not made with logic, but with pressure, fear, and ego. Here, we don't just tell stories. We break them down. We understand them, and we expose them. Welcome to Dark Narrative, where every story hides an uncomfortable truth. Most workplace disasters do not start with one bad order. They start with a pattern people get used to. This story is really about denial, pressure, and the quiet power of a paper trail. People think corruption always looks dramatic. A lie, a cover-up, a big confrontation. But in real life, it often looks much smaller. It looks like a manager saying, "Don't worry about the handbook." It looks like a worker being told, "Just do it this way." It looks like somebody choosing speed over safety, then hoping reality will be kind enough to forgive them later. And that is where this story begins. A few years ago, I worked in a customer support office on the edge of a busy city. One of those places with too much noise, too many headsets, and not enough patience. Our team lead was a man named Martin. He loved one phrase more than anything else: keep a record of everything. He said it like wisdom, like a rule that could protect you from chaos. And to be fair, he was not wrong about that part. But Martin had another habit too. He would give instructions that quietly bent the written process. Not huge scandals, just little shortcuts. Skip a verification step. Mark a case as resolved before it was really resolved. Push through a refund in a way that was faster, but not exactly clean. If anyone asked him to send that in writing, he would smile and say, "Relax, I'll handle it if anyone asks." That sentence is where the danger was hiding. Because a person like Martin does not just give bad instructions. He creates a trap where obedience and safety start to conflict. And that is a terrible position for an employee to be in. The first warning came quietly. One afternoon, I followed Martin's verbal instruction on a customer case. A week later, quality review flagged me for it. Not Martin, me. That is how these situations train people. Not through one huge punishment, but through a small, unfair one. My brain did what most people's brains do under pressure. It tried to make the system feel logical. Maybe I misunderstood him. Maybe this was a one-time issue. Maybe I was just unlucky. That is a very human reflex. When authority is involved, people do not immediately think, "This system is broken." They think, "Maybe I am the one missing something." So, I started doing something different. After every verbal instruction, I sent a short email. "Just to confirm, you want me to do X in situation Y, correct?" It was polite, clean, neutral. And Martin? He never replied. Not once. No confirmation. No correction. No yes. No no. Nothing. That silence mattered more than most people realize. Because silence from a manager is not empty. In a workplace like that, silence is a strategy. It lets them keep power without taking responsibility. This is the part most people miss. The real danger was not that Martin gave bad instructions. The real danger was that he taught people to trust his voice more than the written rules, while also making himself impossible to hold accountable. That is a psychological setup that happens all the time in workplaces, families, friendships, and even relationships. One person pushes the line. The other person feels pressure to go along. Then, when things go wrong, the person who gave the instruction acts confused. That creates a very specific kind of guilt in the person who followed orders. They do not just feel blamed, they feel stupid for having trusted someone. And that is why people stay quiet so often. Because admitting the truth means admitting they were manipulated by a system they wanted to believe in. Months passed. The emails kept going. The workload kept going. The shortcuts kept going. And each time Martin told me to do something off script, I documented it. Not because I was trying to build a case. At first, I just wanted protection. But the longer this went on, the more it became obvious that the paper trail was doing something else too. It was showing a pattern. Martin never corrected me, never denied the instructions, never asked me to stop sending follow-ups. He just kept letting the silence do the work. Then came the incident. A customer issue escalated badly. The process I had followed, again based on Martin's verbal direction, ended up causing a problem that reached upper management. Suddenly, everyone wanted answers. And in the meeting, Martin did what people like him always do when the room gets hot. He tried to rewrite reality. He said he'd never told me to do it that way, where a lot of people fold. Because now the question is not just, what happened? It becomes, can I prove what happened? And most people do not realize how much workplace truth depends on that second question. To understand why Martin thought he could deny it, you have to understand the psychology of control. People like him depend on three things. First, they rely on fear. Most employees do not want to challenge a manager in real time. Second, they rely on confusion. If the process is messy enough, blame becomes harder to place. Third, they rely on social pressure. Nobody wants to be the difficult one in the room. So Martin likely believed the same thing a lot of manipulative people believe, that people will remember the discomfort, not the evidence. And honestly, that often works. Because in the moment, many workers choose survival over confrontation. They think, it is easier to follow the instruction now and deal with it later. That makes emotional sense. It protects the person from immediate conflict, but it also creates a record of compliance that can be used against them. That is the trap. When Martin denied it, I did not argue. I forwarded the email chain. 14 messages, all sent within minutes of the conversations, all calmly phrased, all left unanswered. The room changed instantly, not because I was loud, because the evidence was quiet. That kind of silence can be brutal. Martin started shifting his answer. He said the emails did not show the full context. His manager, sitting in the meeting, asked him to explain the full context. And that was the collapse, because the truth was not dramatic enough to defend with words. He could not walk through the context without exposing himself. He could not explain the shortcuts without admitting the shortcuts existed. He could not defend the verbal instructions without admitting he had pushed people outside policy. For the first time, the room saw the pattern instead of the excuse, and you could feel the psychological weight change. This was no longer a small misunderstanding. It was a system finally meeting its own evidence. Here is what makes this story important. It is not just about one manager being dishonest. It is about how people survive bad leadership. Most workers do not start out rebellious. They start out cooperative. They want to be helpful. They want to be seen as team players. They want to avoid being the person who slows everything down. That desire can be used against them. A manipulative manager knows that most decent people hesitate before causing friction. So they keep giving instructions in a form that cannot easily be traced, then act innocent when the cost appears. That is why the paper trail mattered so much. Not because paperwork is magical, because memory is soft, but timestamps are hard. The deeper lesson is this. When someone wants flexibility from you but refuses accountability for themselves, you are not dealing with leadership. You are dealing with risk transfer. They keep the benefit. You keep the blame. I kept my job. Martin was moved out of the role a few weeks later. But the bigger victory was not the outcome. It was the moment the truth stopped being my word against his and became a documented pattern that could not be ignored. And after that, I changed how I worked forever. Not because I became paranoid, because I learned something useful about human behavior. People often do not deny what they did because they believe they are right. They deny it because they believe the room will reward confidence more than evidence. That is why documentation matters. It is not just paperwork. It is memory that cannot be bullied. This is why stories like this stay with us. They are not just about what happened. They are about why it happened. They remind us that bad decisions are often emotional before they are logical, that pressure can make people cooperate with things they do not fully trust, and that the quiet act of documenting reality can sometimes be the only thing standing between truth and denial. Because in the end, the scariest part was never the mistake. It was the system that tried to pretend the mistake had no owner. People think problems come from mistakes, but in reality, problems begin when people refuse to take ownership of those mistakes. And when a system allows truth to be ignored, lying is not even necessary. Silence is enough. If you like stories where we don't just explain what happened, but why it happened, then subscribe to Dark Narrative, because here, every story exposes a pattern, and the next pattern might be closer to your life than you think.